Welcome to visit Chill English Flow channel for learning English conversation. Jack and Sophia. Thank you.
Welcome to Chill English Flow. If you want to learn English in a relaxed and natural way, you're in the right place. My goal is to help you improve your English.
The law of war, a framework for humanity in armed conflict. The law of war, also known as international humanitarian law, is a comprehensive set of rules that seeks to limit the brutal effects of armed conflict for humanitarian reasons.
It aims to protect people who are not or are no longer participating in hostilities and restricts the means and methods of warfare. This body of law is a crucial component of public international law and is founded on a delicate balance between military necessity and the principles of humanity. The law of war is binding on states and individuals, including members of armed forces and non-state armed groups. Its primary sources are international treaties and customary international law, which consists of rules derived from the general and consistent practice of states that are accepted as law. Core principles guiding conduct in war. 5 fundamental principles underpin the law of war, guiding the conduct of hostilities and the decisions made by military commanders. Distinction. This is a cornerstone principle that requires parties to a conflict to always distinguish between combatants and civilians, as well as between military objectives and civilian objects. Attacks may only be directed against combatants and military objectives. Proportionality. This principle prohibits attacks that may be expected to cause incidental loss of civilian life, injury to civilians, damage to civilian objects, or a combination thereof, which would be excessive in relation to the concrete and direct military advantage anticipated. Military necessity. This principle permits the use of force that is necessary to achieve a legitimate military objective. However, it does not justify actions that are otherwise prohibited by the law of war. Humanity, or unnecessary suffering. This principle forbids the use of weapons, projectiles, and material and methods of warfare of a nature to cause superfluous injury or unnecessary suffering. Honor, or chivalry. This principle demands a certain amount of fairness in offense and defense, and mutual respect between opposing forces. It prohibits tactics such as feigning surrender or misuse of protected emblems, like the Red Cross or Red Crescent. Key international treaties, The Hague and Geneva Conventions. The modern law of war is largely codified in 2 major sets of international treaties, the Hague Conventions and the Geneva Conventions. The Hague Conventions, adopted in 1899 and 1907, were among the first formal statements of the laws of war. They primarily address the means and methods of warfare, including the rights and duties of belligerents in their military operations. These conventions establish rules on topics such as the Pacific settlement of disputes, the opening of hostilities, and the laws and customs of war on land and at sea. The Geneva Conventions of 1949 and their additional protocols form the bedrock of modern international humanitarian law, ratified by nearly every country in the world. These treaties focus on the protection of individuals who are not or are no longer taking part in the fighting. The 4 Geneva Conventions cover: First Geneva Convention protects wounded and sick soldiers on land during war. Second Geneva Convention protects wounded, sick, and shipwrecked military personnel at sea during war. Third Geneva Convention applies to prisoners of war, outlining their rights and the conditions of their detention. Fourth Geneva Convention affords protection to civilians, including those in occupied territory. 2 additional protocols were adopted in 1977 to supplement the Geneva Conventions. Protocol 1 relates to the protection of victims of international armed conflict, while Protocol 2 addresses the protection of victims of non-international armed conflict, civil wars. A 3rd additional protocol was adopted in 2005, creating an additional emblem, the Red Crystal, alongside the Red Cross and Red Crescent. Customary international humanitarian law. Beyond treaties, many of the rules governing armed conflict are derived from customary international law. This is particularly important because it binds all states, regardless of whether they have ratified a specific treaty. Customary international law is established through widespread, representative, and consistent state practice, coupled with the belief that the practice is legally required. The International Committee of the Red Cross, ICC, has conducted a comprehensive study identifying 161 rules of customary international humanitarian law, which has become an important reference for states and international tribunals. Enforcement and breaches of the law of war. Violations of the law of war can lead to both state and individual responsibility. States are obligated to ensure respect for the law of war and may be required to pay reparations for violations. Individuals who commit serious violations of the law of war, known as war crimes, can be held criminally responsible. These grave breaches include willful killing, torture or inhuman treatment, and willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health against protected persons. The enforcement of the law of war occurs through various mechanisms. National courts. States have an obligation to investigate and prosecute war crimes committed by their nationals or on their territory. The principle of universal jurisdiction allows national courts to prosecute certain serious international crimes regardless of where the crime was committed or the nationality of the perpetrator or victim. International tribunals. Ad hoc tribunals, such as the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and the International Criminal Tribunal for the Rwanda (ICTR), were established by the UN Security Council to prosecute individuals responsible for serious violations of international humanitarian law. The International Criminal Court (ICC) is a permanent international court with jurisdiction to prosecute individuals for the most serious crimes of international concern, including war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and the crime of aggression. The United States Security Council can take measures to address serious violations of international humanitarian law, including imposing sanctions and authorizing the use of force. The law of war represents a continuous effort by the international community to mitigate the horrors of armed conflict and to uphold the standard of humanity even in the most dire of circumstances. While its enforcement remains a significant challenge, it provides a critical legal framework for the protection of life and dignity during times of war.